Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sandals of an ordinary Roman citizen living through one of history's most dramatic collapses. You wake up in 476 AD to the sound of empty grain carts rattling over cobblestones, their wooden wheels echoing hollowly through streets that once bustled with abundance. The morning air carries the acrid smell of smoke from distant fires, and you can hear the desperate voices of your neighbours already gathering at the distribution centres, hoping against hope that today there might be bread. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why the mightiest empire in human history could simply disappear. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to share where and when you started watching, or perhaps tell me what drew you to tonight's journey through Rome's final chapter. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter against the morning chill, and step into streets that feel increasingly foreign in your own city. The marble facades still gleam in the early sunlight, but behind those impressive walls, you know the reality is far different. Your stomach gnaws at you. It's been gnawing for months now, as you join the growing crowd shuffling toward the bread distribution point near the old theatre of Marcellus. The line stretches farther than it did yesterday, and you recognise faces that once belonged to merchants, minor officials, even a few patricians who've fallen on hard times. Everyone looks a little thinner, a little more desperate than they did last week. The woman ahead of you clutches a ceramic pot that she hopes to trade for grain. Actual Roman coins have become increasingly worthless, and even the grain distributors now prefer bartered goods. You remember when your father told stories of the great grain fleets from Egypt, how massive ships would dock at Portus loaded with enough wheat to feed the city for months. Those ships stopped coming regularly years ago, and now the granaries that once bulged with surplus stand mostly empty. The few remaining supplies come from whatever local farmers can spare, and that's precious little with Germanic tribes raiding the countryside. As you shuffle forward in line, you overhear fragments of conversation that paint a picture of a city slowly starving. Someone mentions that the Bakers' Guild is mixing sawdust with what little flour remains. Another voice whispers about families in the Subura district boiling leather scraps to make soup. These aren't rumours anymore, they're survival strategies. The distribution official, a harried-looking man with ink-stained fingers, finally reaches your spot in line. He's one of the few remaining civil servants still trying to maintain order in a system that's crumbling around him. When you present your token, a small bronze piece that proves your right to the grain dole, he shakes his head apologetically. Today's shipment was smaller than expected, and you're just a few people too late. You're not surprised. Really, this has happened 3 times in the past 2 weeks. What surprises you is that you're not angry anymore, just tired. The fury that burned in your chest months ago when this crisis first began has faded to a dull acceptance. This is simply what life in Rome has become. Walking home empty-handed, you pass the fountain where you used to meet friends for morning gossip. The marble nymphs still pour water from their urns, but the flow has slowed to a trickle. Even the aqueducts, those marvels of Roman engineering that have supplied the city for centuries, are showing signs of neglect. Repairs that once would have been completed within days now go unaddressed for months. You pause at a bakery that's been in the same family for 4 generations. The wooden shutters are closed, and a small sign written in shaky Latin explains that they'll reopen when supplies permit. The baker's children used to play in the street out front, but you haven't seen them in weeks. Historians still argue whether the population decline in late imperial Rome was primarily due to plague, famine, or mass migration. But standing here on this empty street, the cause matters less than the effect. Your own apartment building, a modest insula near the Campus Martius, shows the same signs of decline. The ground floor shops that once sold imported silks and spices now stand vacant. Their owners either fled to the countryside or reduced to selling whatever scraps they can find. The building's superintendent, who used to take pride in keeping the common areas clean, now spends his days searching for firewood and edible plants. As you climb the narrow stairs to your third-floor room, you can hear Mrs. Claudia on the second floor teaching her grandchildren to count in Gothic. It's a practical decision, more practical than teaching them advanced Latin rhetoric. Anyway, the Gothic federates who've been settled in Roman territories for decades are increasingly the ones with steady work and reliable income. Your small room contains the basics: a bed, a table, a few cooking vessels, and a trunk containing what remains of your family's possessions. On the wall hangs a small bronze medallion bearing the image of Emperor Romulus Augustulus, though everyone knows the real power lies with Odoacer, the Germanic king who conquered Italy. The irony isn't lost on you that the last Western Roman emperor shares a name with the legendary founder of Rome. Looking out your window toward the Palatine Hill, you can see the imperial palaces still gleaming in the distance. But they feel as remote as the moon. The connection between ordinary citizens and imperial power, already tenuous, has essentially dissolved. You're not exactly sure when you stopped thinking of yourself as living in the Roman Empire and started simply thinking of yourself as trying to survive in a dangerous world. The afternoon brings no relief from the morning's disappointments. You spend time mending a tunic that's been patched so many times it resembles a patchwork quilt more than clothing. Your neighbours gather in the courtyard below, sharing information about which parts of the city are safe to visit and which should be avoided. The urban prefect's guards still patrol some areas, but their numbers have dwindled, and their authority is increasingly questioned. Evening falls early, and with it comes the familiar sounds of a city learning to live with less. Fewer oil lamps flicker in windows. Fewer voices echo through the streets. The great city that once boasted over 1 million inhabitants feels almost empty, though you know thousands of people still call it home. As you settle into sleep, your last conscious thought is wondering whether tomorrow's bread line might move a little faster. You're awakened before dawn by unfamiliar voices speaking in guttural Germanic tones just outside your building. Peering through your small window, you see a family of Goths setting up what appears to be a permanent camp in the abandoned shop below the baker's place. The father, a tall man with intricate braided hair and well-maintained weapons, directs his wife and children as they unload a cart filled with their possessions. What strikes you most isn't their foreignness, it's how organised and purposeful they seem compared to the Romans you've been seeing lately. The Gothic family moves with the confidence of people who know exactly what they're doing. The woman begins immediately sweeping out the shop space while her husband examines the building's structure with the eye of someone planning to stay. Their children, rather than running wild as you might expect from barbarians, help methodically sort through bundles of tools, household goods, and what appears to be seed for planting. These aren't raiders or refugees, they're settlers. By the time you've dressed and made your way downstairs, the Gothic father is already in conversation with your building's superintendent. What surprises you is that they're speaking in perfectly serviceable Latin, though heavily accented. The Goth is explaining that he served in the Roman army for 12 years under various Germanic commanders and received this shop space as part of his settlement grant. He has official papers, signed by Odoacer's administration, giving him legal right to establish his family here. Your superintendent, a man who's lived in this neighbourhood his entire life, nods wearily and welcomes the newcomers. There's no anger in his voice, just resignation. At least someone's moving in instead of moving out. He mutters to you later. It's true, over the past year, you've watched Roman families abandon their homes and businesses, usually heading toward relatives in the countryside or seeking opportunities in the Eastern Empire. The Gothic children fascinate you despite yourself. The oldest, a boy perhaps 12 years old, speaks 3 languages fluently, his native Gothic, Latin, and what sounds like Frankish. When you pause to listen, you realise he's translating for his younger sister, explaining Roman customs and city living. These children are growing up trilingual in a way that would have been remarkable for patrician Romans just a generation ago. Throughout the morning, more Germanic families arrive in your district. Some are Goths, others appear to be Vandals or Suebi based on their distinctive clothing and weapons. What they all share is a sense of legitimate belonging that many Romans seem to have lost. They're not squatters or invaders in the traditional sense. They carry settlement documents. They respect property boundaries. And they're clearly planning to contribute to the community rather than simply exploit it. The irony becomes apparent when you visit the Forum later that day. Roman citizens cluster in small groups, complaining about the barbarian invasion and lamenting the loss of traditional Roman values. Meanwhile, the Germanic settlers are the ones actually maintaining their properties, learning Latin and adapting to urban life. Historians still argue whether the transformation of the Western Empire was primarily conquest or evolution, but from your street-level perspective, it looks more like replacement than destruction. Your new Gothic neighbour introduces himself as Athanaric, a name that sounds simultaneously foreign and oddly familiar. He explains that his grandfather fought against Rome. His father fought for Rome, and he served Rome until Rome essentially ceased to exist as a functioning entity. Now he serves Odoacer, but he seems to view this as a natural progression rather than a betrayal. Rome is an idea. He tells you in his careful Latin, ideas change hands. The practical implications of these new neighbours become clear throughout the week. While Roman shops remain shuttered due to supply problems, Athanaric's family immediately begins trading with other Germanic settlers who've established themselves throughout the city. They have access to goods and resources that traditional Roman merchants can no longer obtain. Their network extends beyond the city walls to farming communities and trading posts that Roman authorities no longer effectively control. You find yourself in the peculiar position of needing to ask barbarians for help obtaining basic necessities. Athanaric's wife, whose Latin is limited but whose gesture vocabulary is extensive, offers to trade some grain for help teaching her children to read Roman-style accounting records. It's a fair exchange, but it represents a fundamental shift in how your neighbourhood operates. The children adapt fastest to these changes. Roman and Germanic kids begin playing together in the streets, creating hybrid games that combine Roman ball sports with Germanic wrestling traditions. Their parents watch nervously at first, but practical concerns soon override cultural prejudices. When food is scarce and security uncertain, having friendly neighbours matters more than having purely Roman neighbours. The linguistic changes happen gradually but inexorably. Latin remains the official language of commerce and administration, but Gothic and Frankish phrases creep into everyday conversation. You find yourself learning Germanic words for concepts that don't translate well into Latin, particularly words related to community cooperation and shared responsibility. The Romans had legal concepts with these ideas, but the Germanic peoples seem to have more practical approaches. Religious differences prove less problematic than you expected. Many of the Germanic settlers are Arian Christians, which Roman Catholic authorities view as heretical. But on a neighbourhood level, the distinctions matter little. Everyone prays to Christ, everyone observes similar moral codes, and everyone faces the same daily challenges of finding food and maintaining safety. Theological debates seem like luxuries compared to practical survival. What disturbs you most isn't the presence of Germanic families, it's the absence of Roman authority. No officials come to register the new residents, no tax collectors appear to assess their properties. No military recruiters arrive to conscript their young men. The administrative apparatus that once managed every aspect of urban life has simply evaporated. Your new neighbours fill a vacuum rather than displace an existing system. By month's end, your street looks and sounds different but functions better than it has in years. The Germanic settlers have repaired communal wells, organised neighbourhood watch groups, and established reliable trade connections with rural suppliers. They've brought skills that complement urban Roman capabilities: metalworking, animal husbandry, and practical engineering. The combination creates a more resilient community than either group could maintain alone. Late one evening, as you lie in bed listening to Athanaric's family sharing stories in their musical Germanic tongue, you realise that you're witnessing something historians will puzzle over for centuries. This isn't the violent collapse of civilization. It's civilization adapting, evolving, and finding new forms. The Rome you knew is disappearing, but something new and potentially viable is taking its place. One neighbourhood at a time. You clutch a handful of silver denarii in your palm as you approach Marcus the oil merchant's stall. The same stall where your family has purchased lamp oil for 3 generations. The coins feel substantial and reassuring. Genuine Roman silver bearing the profiles of emperors stretching back decades. But when you extend your hand to complete what should be a routine transaction, Marcus shakes his head with the expression that's become all too familiar throughout the city. "I'm sorry, friend," he says, "not meeting your eyes directly. Silver's not worth what it used to be. Too much of it floating around, and half of it's been clipped or debased. I need something I can actually use." He gestures toward a collection of goods behind his counter: ceramic pots, iron tools, bolts of rough cloth, even some exotic amber beads that clearly didn't originate in Roman territories. The economic reality hits you like a physical blow. These coins, minted in official imperial workshops and bearing the sacred images of Roman authority, have become essentially worthless in practical commerce. You've heard rumours about this happening, but experiencing it firsthand feels like watching the foundation of civilization crumble in real time. Roman currency once held value from Britain to Mesopotamia, but now a local oil merchant won't accept it for basic necessities. Marcus explains the situation with the weary patience of someone who's had this conversation dozens of times. The new Germanic administration keeps minting coins, but they're using less silver and more base metals. Meanwhile, everyone's hoarding the old silver ones, thinking they'll be worth more later. The result is that nobody trusts any coins anymore, Roman, Gothic, or otherwise. Barter's more reliable. You dig through your belongings at home, searching for items that might interest Marcus. A bronze mirror that belonged to your grandmother, some wool fabric you'd been saving for winter clothing, a collection of writing styluses that seem absurdly obsolete now that literacy rates are plummeting. These become your new currency. The mirror trades for a week's worth of oil, a transaction that would have cost you a single coin just 2 years ago. The shift away from monetary exchange affects every aspect of daily life in ways both subtle and profound. Without standardized currency, every transaction requires negotiation. The baker might accept grain in exchange for bread, but only if it's good grain, and only if he currently needs grain rather than firewood or cloth or metalwork. Simple purchases that once took moments now consume entire afternoons of bargaining and evaluation. You discover that different neighbourhoods have developed their own informal exchange systems. Near the docks, where Germanic traders arrive regularly, Baltic amber and furs hold premium value. In the artisan quarters, worked metal objects command respect. Around the remaining government buildings, anything that demonstrates literacy, scrolls, writing materials, even well-crafted Latin inscriptions, can be traded for substantial goods. The transformation forces you to develop skills you never needed as a Roman citizen. You learn to assess the quality of cloth by touch, to estimate the purity of metals by weight and colour, to judge the freshness of food products by subtle signs your ancestors might have known, but your generation had forgotten. Roman civilization had specialised to the point where citizens could live entire lives without understanding basic crafts, but that luxury has evaporated along with reliable currency. Athanaric, your Gothic neighbour, proves surprisingly helpful in navigating this new economy. Germanic peoples, he explains, have maintained barter traditions alongside their adoption of Roman coinage, so the transition feels less jarring to them. He teaches you that a good iron knife is worth approximately 15 pounds of grain, that amber beads from the Baltic coast trade at premium rates due to their rarity and beauty, and that well-tanned leather commands higher value than silver jewellery. The psychological impact of worthless coins extends beyond mere inconvenience. Roman identity was deeply connected to Roman institutions, and currency represented one of the most visible symbols of imperial power and unity. When shopkeepers reject Roman money, they're implicitly rejecting Roman authority. Each refused transaction feels like a small act of rebellion against an empire that can no longer protect or provide for its citizens. You witness fascinating adaptations to the currency crisis throughout the city. Some merchants develop elaborate credit systems based on personal relationships and reputation rather than monetary deposits. Others create private currencies, tokens or tallies that represent goods stored in specific warehouses or workshops. A few entrepreneurial Romans begin specializing in evaluation services, charging small fees to assess the trade value of various goods. The administrative implications prove even more challenging than commercial ones. Roman government had always depended on taxation collected in standardized currency, but what happens when that currency becomes worthless? Odoacer's administration attempts to collect taxes in goods rather than coins, but evaluating and storing thousands of different products creates logistical nightmares that Roman bureaucracy was never designed to handle. Historians still argue whether the collapse of Roman currency was a cause or effect of imperial decline, but from your daily experience, it feels like both simultaneously. The worthless coins in your palm represent not just economic failure, but the breakdown of trust between government and citizens. When people stop believing in a society's money, they've essentially stopped believing in that society's future. Your evening meal consists of bread purchased with ceramic bowls, oil obtained through grandmother's mirror, and wine acquired by teaching a Germanic merchant's son to write Latin letters. It's adequate nutrition, but the complexity of obtaining it exhausts you more than physical labour ever did. You fall asleep wondering how long a civilization can function when every simple transaction requires negotiations that would have challenged medieval diplomats. The strangest realization comes weeks later when you find yourself preferring barter to the old coin system. Direct exchange feels more honest somehow. You trade genuine value for genuine value without the abstract intermediary of currency that might prove worthless tomorrow. Perhaps the barbarians understood something about economics that sophisticated Romans had forgotten in their pursuit of financial complexity. As you drift towards sleep, the rejected coins on your table catch moonlight streaming through the window, looking beautiful and utterly useless in the pale light.